Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one I'm going to be ranking all upcoming EX Pokemon from Paldea Evolved and beyond. So of course, like all ranking videos, these may change based on what new cards get revealed over the next few sets, so take these rankings with a pinch of salt basically, and every time I look at this list I want to change things around again, so just bear that in mind I guess. So first of all, I'd just like to talk about Dedenne because I really think Dedenne is a one-trick pony. I think it will exclusively see play in God of War or Mewtwo v Union decks, and I really don't think it will see any play outside of those decks. Maybe like Shadow Rider VMAX, but to be honest, I don't think this card is like super good either way. So Tail Swap allows you to move all damage counters from one of your opponent benched Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So essentially, you can like damage a Pokemon with God of War and then move all his damage counters to your opponent's active and heal off all the damage, which seems pretty cool in theory. It's a heal plus a KO potentially. But to be honest, I just think Dedenne is super weak. It's 170 HP, so you're giving up two prizes, and yeah, nothing too great about Dedenne. It's not necessarily the worst EX that's upcoming, but I just wanted to, get him out of the way because I don't think it's particularly strong. So I want to spend about a total of 3 seconds on Pikachu EX, so that should be enough. Tinkaton, I think, has a pretty cool attack in the form of Big Hammer that does 30 damage for each card in your hand. Unfortunately, there is the new supporter Ono, I believe her name is, that says each player shovels their hand and puts it on the bottom of their deck, then each player draws a card for each of the remaining prize cards. So I know some of you will say that like there was Milotic from, I think it was Battle Styles, that prevents all effects of like trainers done to your hand, which in theory would give you some great protection and allow Big Hammer to take these like massive one-hit KOs, plus you're kind of tanky at 300 HP. But unfortunately, that's a stage 1, so you're setting up a stage 2 to then set up another stage 1 that's different, and it's not going to draw any cards, so I think the deck could get pretty awkward pretty quickly. I don't think this deck is unplayable garbage, but I don't think it's, anything too crazy. The single prize Tinkaton is okay, to be honest, as well. Special Hammer does like 180 damage. Gather materials can be used to draw more cards, but honestly, I don't have very high hopes for this card. Next up, we have Lycanroc, which again is a kind of like mid-underwhelming EX. You'll notice me saying that a lot for these reveals, unfortunately. But Lycanroc isn't anything too crazy. Like Rock Chestplate is pretty useful, allowing you to reduce damage by 30, so Scary Fangs can potentially be used across multiple turns, as opposed to Lycanroc getting one killed, which is very desirable. There's also the fact that Koraidon can help power you up, so you shouldn't have to rely on double turbo all the time. And you also have the single prize Lycanroc for Midnight Fangs, which can be a pretty good attack in certain situations. So I don't think this card is terrible, but I think it's pretty underwhelming compared to most of the other EX. So at number 13, we've got Chi-Yu, which has two pretty interesting attacks, Burning Envy and Flame Surge. Burning Envy is very reminiscent of course, Houndoom EX, which did see a lot of play, to be honest, for its mill effect, but I don't think milling 2 cards is quite enough in this format, especially not without Team Rocket's handiwork around. So I don't think this card is particularly great. Flame Surge can be pretty good if you can get it powered up with like Magma Basin. There's also the new Squawkabill EX, to potentially allow you to get the energy and find the stadium quicker. So there's like that element of Flame Surge can potentially be used on the first turn going second, which is cool. There's also like the new Charm of Courage and Wilderness of Disaster if you really do want to lean onto more of the mill side, but honestly, I don't think Chi-Yu is particularly great. Next up, we have Fortress. Pretty similar story. It allows you to knock itself out, and you get to search your deck for 5 basic grass energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, which is, of course, an amazing effect, but unfortunately, it is knocking itself out for 2 prize cards, so your opponent will immediately go down to 4 prizes. Admittedly, you could combo this without a new supporter, so you could like disrupt your opponent pretty badly, or maybe even play something like a Judge afterwards, which is pretty cool. So there is at least some decent applications for Fortress, but unfortunately, what in Standard right now really needs grass energy, and is the trade-off worth it? So stuff like Blissey V is probably your best bet, to be honest. Wu Qian is okay, but honestly, I don't think Fortress is a super great card. It's a cool card, but giving up 2 prize cards is of course pretty dicey. Next up, we have Copperajah with the ability Bronze Body that says his Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks, which is pretty awesome given the fact it already has 300 HP, so it is a very tanky boy. Also, Nosequake doing 260 damage is pretty efficient, and 30 damage to each of your bench Pokemon is a wee bit bad, but if you had multiple Copperages set up, then none of them would be taking any damage. So pretty cool Pokemon overall. You can of course use stuff like Cheryl, maybe even Mirage Gate to power this up. There's also like the Magenzone to accelerate energy. You even have the Earthworm if you want like a cool single prize option. So I don't hate Copperaja to be honest. I just think it needs a wee bit more than it currently has in standard, like a supporter to accelerate metal energy perhaps. But honestly, I could see this being a pretty efficient attacker at some point in the future. Next up, we have Wu Qian, which has the attack Devouring Ivy, which does 60 damage when your opponent's bench Pokemon for each prize card your opponent's taken. Very strong attack, scales very high in the late game. But unfortunately, the key part of that phrasing is the late game. It's not doing a lot of damage in the early game. And putting 4 energy on this guy just to do 220 is pretty underwhelming because you're never, of course, like one killing V-Stars or Tankier EX. So I don't think this card is super good. It's more of like a tech card. Like you could in theory build a deck around Fortress Wu Qian with stuff like Path to the Peak and Ono, and you could be like all disruptive and snipe potential. But to be honest, I think Wu Qian is better off as a niche attacker in some kind of Gardenia's Vigor deck, maybe even Mirage Gate and Lost Zone potentially. So 2 grass and then any other energy. I mean, in Giratina decks, you already play grass and psychic, so it kind of makes sense to just throw one of these in there, maybe give you like a nice late game spread option, I should say. So you can like do some sniping damage and set up more KOs. So I don't hate Wu Qian. I think it's a pretty cool card, but I don't think it's, pretty great, basically. It's nothing too crazy. Next up, we have Paldean Clodsire, which is a pretty cool card. Allows you to poison your opponent's active if there is a stave in play, which is pretty decent, to be honest. And then Bone Needles does 200 damage for a Dark Double Turbo. And if you flip a coin and if tails during your next turn, this Pokemon can't even attack. So, pretty annoying. But it does combo quite nicely with the upcoming Sableye, which does 20 damage. And if they're affected by Special Condition, aka Poison, this attack will do 70 more. So effectively what you can do is hit for 200, and then the Poison will take it to 210, and then you can hit for another 90 damage. So what's that, 300 already? And then the Poison tick will take it to 310, effectively. So yeah, you can definitely get there with the damage output across 2 hit KOs, and you don't have to rely on Clodsire for every KO. So honestly, I don't hate this card a lot. There's like decent stadiums as well. There's Lesson Studio and Orson Town coming out, so Orson Town will help you find all your Paldean Whippers as well as your Sableyes, and then Lesson Studio would allow you to do extra damage. So honestly, I think this card is pretty solid. I just don't like the energy cost and the fact that you have to kind of put yourselves in a position where you maybe want to attack with Clodsire and then switch into a Sableye. Then what happens if your opponent bosses the Clodsire and you don't have another one ready to go? There is some like awkward situations, plus you need double turbo potentially. So yeah, could get a bit awkward, but honestly, pretty solid card overall. Next up, we have Skeldridge. I wanted to rank Skeldridge a bit higher, but honestly, I couldn't really justify it because the list does get a bit more competitive as we move up. And of course, Burning Voice doing 10 less damage for each damage counter on him is pretty grim. I know we have stuff like Cheryl, the Oricorio, and of course Magma Basin to re-accelerate the energy, but it is a bit of an underwhelming effect because we're not even one-hit KOing most stuff without modifiers, so we are KOing like Evolving Vs and some EXs, but we're not getting stuff like Lugia, and we're certainly not getting stuff like God of War unless it damages itself a lot. So yeah, it's a fairly underwhelming set of attacks, really. The most appealing thing to me, honestly, with Skeldridge is the very high hit points. 340 is an absolute tank of a card. So this means it's just never really getting one-hit KO'd, ever, unless you're playing against a water deck, which is kind of rare right now because of the amount of lightning. So Skeldridge could have a place in the format, but Vitality Song and Burning Voice doesn't seem like it's going to be enough for this card. I hope to be wrong because it's a very cool card, but, I just don't see this card being very successful in the long run, unfortunately. Next up, we have Bellibolt, which I'll admit only made it this high up in the list because it has Polaris' Ball, which can do automatic Polaris, but you have to discard 2 lightning energy in order to do it, and it only does 160 damage. Admittedly, when we usually see these kind of like Polaris effects, they don't do nearly as this much damage. I think the last one to do around 160, 180 damage was Tapu Koko VMAX, which, in fairness, did see a bunch of play, so there is potential for Bellibolt to be like this super annoying deck that, does 160 in Polaris, and then it has 280 HP as well, so even if the opponent can switch out and attack with something else, it's probably not getting one hit KO too frequently, so yeah, I kind of like Belly Bolt. It's sort of underwhelming because we have better lightning attackers, but at the same time, it does fill the niche of having a Polaris option. Next up, we have Monkey, which has the attack Angry Grudge. Put up 12 damage counters on Annihilate, and the attack does 20 damage for each damage counter you placed in this way. So actually very efficient damage for single energy. Of course, it will leave you vulnerable, so you have to pair it with stuff like Rock Chestplate and then maybe something like Cheryl or Choreo. But unlike Skelderidge, I should say, I really like this card because after you Cheryl, it's just 1 energy to use the attack again. It's not like Skelderidge, which then needs 2 energy. This just needs 1. And you're hitting a pretty good weakness into lightning, so honestly, I kind of like this card. Maybe I'm biased because I think the Pokemon is super cool, but honestly, Angry Grudge seems like a pretty efficient attack overall. Next up, we have Ting Lu with the ability Earthen Curse, which can shut down abilities on non-Pokemon EX. So, as far as I'm aware, if its translation is fully correct, this will shut off Vs as well, which is pretty important because it'll shut off stuff like Luminion, I guess, but Luminion will, of course, be put into play with its ability, so it gets kind of awkward in that sense. But Earthen Curse certainly has some decent applications against stuff like Baxcalibur, which looks to be pretty strong. Also stuff like Mimikyu, which could wall out your damage, so honestly, I think Ting Lu is pretty decent. It's also kind of bulky for a basic, and you can even pair it with Rock Chestplate and Koraidon. So, yeah, Ting Lu, pretty solid card overall. Next up, we have Quaxalava, which honestly was the most annoying deck to play and play against in testing. My first few iterations of this deck were just absolute garbage, clunky garbage mess. Although it does seem like Japan has found a way to make it work, thanks to stuff like Mimikyu being revealed. And so when they have Mimikyu, it also means that they can now do stuff like Lively Samba, 60 damage, and then switch into the Mimikyu, which is of course pretty strong. So Quaxalava, honestly, pretty solid card overall. Has stuff like Arida to help with rare candy consistency. Also has Cheryl if you really want to, but to be honest, I don't think this deck needs Cheryl. I think it just needs Arida and Mimikyus. Then you even have Klefki if you really want to try and shut off Lost Zone a bit. So, pretty strong card overall, and the only problem I foresee with this card potentially is the weakness to Lightning, because Miraidon is on the rise, and Miraidon is a very fun deck and is a lot of fun to a lot of people, so I could foresee that being a bit of a problem. But if anyone wanted like confirmation, is this card playable? Well, yeah, it is playable, and it's certainly pretty decent. So next up is Meowscarada, which has the amazing ability Magic Bouquet, which allows you to discard a grass energy and place 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then Nail Scratch does 100 damage, and then if they're already damaged, this attack does 120 more. So what effectively you can do is place 3 damage counters on a Pokemon, hit it with Nail Scratch, and then you'll be doing 250 total, which is really solid, because then you just need to escape rope and then use another Magic Bouquet and knock it out. Or, of course, just 2-hit KO stuff and then snipe Evolving Basics on the bench with Magic Bouquet. You can also snipe stuff like Flaffy with low HP. So, honestly, I think this card is really strong. In testing, it's been very useful with stuff like Hisuian Lilligant, which not only acts as a backup attacker, but also Star Perfume just really helps you get set up, allowing you to search for 5 in any combination of Grass Pokemon and Grass Energy. So, just using that to set up all your Meowscaradas throughout the game has been really good. So honestly, I have high hopes for this card. I think it's really solid for stage 2. Is it as good as Gardevoir? Probably not, no, but it is a very solid card and worth paying attention to, especially if you're a fan of this card and you want to see it do well. Next up, we have Squawkabilly. Initially, this card was number 1, but I think another card actually takes the cake just a wee bit more. But Squawkabilly EX, very powerful ability show-off, which is reminiscent of Dedenne. What's also really strong about Squawkabilly is the fact the ability doesn't require you to bench it, so you can use Nest Ball or VIP Pass to find it and then use the ability, which is honestly the most appealing part about this card, apart from maybe the attack being semi-useful. But honestly, the ability being limited to the first turn of the game really limits the use of Squawkabilly, and in personal testing, this card wasn't that strong because of it. Usually, like the opening hand, you don't need to change it all that much. Sometimes you want to find an energy or supporter or maybe more basics, but typically if I have a battle VIP pass, I'm not looking for a Squawkabilly, I'm looking for other basics to set up. So have reservations. Like I'm got some reservations about this card. I don't think it's amazingly strong. Certainly not as good as Dedenne was, but it does seem to be on everyone's radar as like the next Dedenne charge. So, I could be very, very wrong about this card, but whatever's, I guess. Next up, we have Chen Pao, which has the amazing attack Hail Blade combined with the amazing ability Trembling Frost, and of course Max Caliber, which will allow you to accelerate any number of water energy cards from your hand throughout the different turns. So the deck is very, very strong. Hail Blade obviously does a whole ton of damage, and then Trembling Frost is basically a Professor's Letter that you can use every single turn. This deck honestly seems very, very strong. Superior Energy Retrieval, allowing you to retrieve up to 4 basic energies as well. Yeah, I think Chen Pao ticks a lot of boxes. The only box I think this deck does not tick is HP, because 220 is just so squishy. It means stuff like Cramorant will turret KO you. Also, some like even evolving Vs and stuff can KO you, so yeah, Chen Pao is a little bit weak on the HP side, but I honestly think this card is super strong and is going to make a pretty big impact in the format. Next up, we've got Slowking for the bonus round, because when I was making this video initially, I forgot about Slowking. RIP. Honestly, I don't think this card is super crazy or anything. Its best attack, Wisdom Headbutt, that does 130 and allows you to search for any 2 cards, which seems, initially, that seems really good. But unfortunately, there is, of course, the Ono supporter that's going to be in every deck as like a 3 of or a 4 of even. So, yeah, seems a little bit weak. It's funny because we had a format with Togekiss VMAX that didn't really do anything at all. And then we've got this new Slowking coming out, and all of a sudden everyone thinks its effect is absolutely broken, so busted, so good. But unfortunately, you just have to play the supporter, and all that is undone, and you've just done 130 damage for 2 energy. The optimist in me wants to say that Control will love this, which it will, to be fair, and stuff like Zora could maybe even make use of this, or a God of War deck, funny enough, but honestly, I don't think this card is super amazing, and I don't see it being that successful, to be honest. But yeah, thank you for watching. This has been Ember Power, and yeah, hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching.